Welcome to the Building Web3 podcast. I have my good friend Mike. He's the CEO of Duro Labs and Pyth. Before we get too deep into those two companies, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into this crypto space?
Yeah, sure, Jax. So I have a traditional finance background. My very first job out of college was at Morgan Stanley on the FX sales and trading desk back in the good old days when people were still screaming. And that market went electronic, and I went to high frequency trading firms to kind of chase the cutting edge of the market structure. I then eventually found myself at Jump Crypto in 2019, or Jump Trading in the crypto division. There was about 22 of us when I joined, but it obviously grew to quite a bit. That was an amazing place because it was really, first the largest trader that entered into the market from a traditional perspective and became really, really sizable. So I still think the largest crypto trader in the world. But it expanded beyond just trading into lots of venture and partnerships and building. And it put me in a kind of the nexus of the who's who within the crypto market. And I got to meet all the people who were building. That was sort of my thesis of going there, is I'd be able to get to know Steve Jobs, always still in the garage. And the Pyth Network was really a concept we came up with there, and I spun it out with the help of several other trading firms.
So tell us a little bit about, for people that are unfamiliar, what is Pyth?
Yeah, Pyth is a protocol that is designed to solve the Oracle problem. So I'll briefly go over what the Oracle problem is. So blockchains, as most people are aware, are these trust machines where trust is guaranteed via programmatic or math mechanisms. So you've got proof of stake or proof of work. So you basically do all of this complicated stuff to make sure that everyone can trust the state. And the state is really like who owns what right now. But smart contracts and applications want a little bit more than that generally. And so they require data from the outside world. So when you bring in that data, you immediately will compromise that state. So what oracles do is they preserve trust across different data sets that are external to the state. And so you really just bring things in. And the core niche that the Pyth Network has is it solves for trust at the very fastest speeds in the world. And the backbone of that is while I was at Jump, we realized that speed of trading is paramount. They don't call high frequency trading that for nothing. And so the initial versions of DeFi were done at Ethereum resolution, so 12-second blocks, 12 transactions per second sort of thing. But then when we got to Solana speeds and everything was at 400 milliseconds, things started becoming more interesting. And at that point, the oracles had not updated, and oracles were really updating only every 50 basis points move or 24 hours. So the Pyth Network was designed to solve this for trust at speed and do so in a scalable way. We have now deployed the Pyth Network on over 75 different blockchains. There's about 450 applications. I think about 70% of the on-chain perpetual dexes use Pyth. So the market share is very massive in this sector of applications who require high speed or high fidelity data.
And to really solidify what this means, let's go through. We used to love this exercise at BlackRock, is the life of a transaction. So let's talk about maybe a high frequency trader or one of these networks that is using some data, and where you guys collect the data, and then how that kind of shows up on the blockchain, how one of these underlying dApps is using it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a great way to understand where the innovation came within the network. So the network consists of really two groups of participants. There are publishers, and then there are application consumers or users. So the publishers are all disclosed. They're institutions, and the kind of core value proposition or the core tenet of becoming a publisher in the network is, do you have a business that's big enough where your reputation would be hurt if you try to manipulate this? And so it's all the large trading firms, large exchanges that are really doing something else to make money rather than providing data to the blockchains. And I'll get into why that's kind of important. But to give you some names, there's Jane Street, Susquehanna, DRW, HRT, Tower Research. The list goes on. It's basically the who's who of all the trading firms. All the crypto exchanges, for the most part, are represented. So Binance, OKEx, Bybit, etc. And then there's a huge swath of exchanges within traditional markets. SIBO Global Markets is probably the largest one, but there's several others like MIAX, MEMX, etc. So all of these firms, there's about 110 of them currently. Somewhere between 2 to 4 get added each month. They publish data to this PythNet blockchain. So PythNet is a blockchain that is effectively a fork of Solana. It's an SVM. And we can talk about why it isn't on Solana and why it's a fork and what it does as an app chain. All this data gets published there, and there's 600 symbols. Again, this number goes up every month, and it keeps getting larger. But they're publishing data at whatever speeds they have, and it's being aggregated at these 400 millisecond block times. Then if you're an application, let's say you've built an application on Optimism, like Synthetics, and you're dependent upon a Oracle price to let traders exchange risk at, what you'll do is you'll call that price, or the user will have a function that calls the price from the PythNet. It gets delivered over a bridge, over a wormhole, onto Optimism.
All right, real quick, this is an exercise we still love to do at BlackRock. Is the life of a transaction. So we want to kind of solidify in the audience's head what happens when you guys are, collecting the data all the way down to the point where it gets filtered into the DApp.
Yeah, so the data gets collected or submitted on chain by institutions who are big trading firms, exchanges, and in some cases banks. So the litmus test for joining this network is, do you have another institution outside of providing data that would be materially hurt if you were to screw things up on the Oracle price? So it's really the who's who in the trading firms. So Susquehanna, DRW, Jane Street, et cetera. Lots of the crypto exchanges, Binance, OKEx, Bybit, and U.S. equity exchanges, SIBO Global Markets, et cetera. They publish onto PythNet, and then PythNet's a fork of Solana, and then data can get pulled onto 78 currently blockchains. And the way that gets pulled is an application that requires an Oracle price for a transaction to happen, say Synthetics on Optimism, will actually pull that as part of the execution. So someone wants to open a trade, they pull in the Oracle price onto Optimism, they pay a small Pyth fee, and the price gets delivered securely there.
And talk to us a little bit about why fork Solana. It was quite interesting. I'd be like, oh, why?
Yeah, it's the first SVM, actually. So Pyth started as a project in really 2021, went live on Solana in September. And within short order, Pyth Network, which is incredibly chatty, became over 50% of the block space on Solana. Now, there are two problems with this. So the first one is that this was the time when Solana started to get some performance issues, particularly around like NFT mints. And the chain would go down. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it who was active during that time, to lots of FUD and to people saying that, Solana is completely dead. Obviously, that hasn't been the case. But that was the first one. If you want to go cross train and you've got dependency on something that doesn't have 100% reliability, well, you're going to have to figure something out. And the other element of it is it became expensive. So when you're basically compiling everything on a public blockchain, you're going to have some issues. Now, it's an interesting topic now because there's a whole lot of debate around app chains versus like an application staying on a chain. In fact, at the day of recording, yesterday, Uniswap launched their own chain, up much to, I think, some of the Ethereum community's dismay. But I think the idea for us is that we already have this embedded group of community, right? There's these publishers, there's 110 of them who are publishing data. And that's really all we need, right? We need the publishing side to be connected to the application. We don't need to go and try and recruit users from like the masses to come and use something, because the distribution mechanism looks very hub and spoke. And so this removed our variable costs and made it a fixed cost, right? We're the only application on PythNet. So we don't have this gas and we're not competing with other applications. 100% of the throughput. PythNet currently has about 2,000 transactions per second that are aggregating, which actually is pretty close to Solana. So we would be around 100% of the Solana block space had we tried to do this. And we're making some modifications to continue to improve the environment to really fit our needs.
Yeah, and sorry to go off topic, but what did you think about the Unichain announcement? It does seem like it's kind of validating a bit of optimism's thesis around like super chains.
Yeah, so the Pyth Network is a very proud partner with the Unichain, and has been a proud partner with most of the super chains. BD wise, I think it has worked out well. Um, it goes a little bit to what I was just talking about, where if you're big enough and you're not dependent upon attracting users, I think it makes a lot of sense. At this stage, it may not in the future. It may be the case that constraints are all fully removed, and all applications can work on a public blockchain, but it's certainly not the case today. And so, I think no illustration is more telling than the example for Pyth, right? We would love to be on Solana, but it's not practical to be able to be there. We can't be 100% of the block space. There's no room for anyone else to do anything. But we do admire and stand by the characteristics of having a public blockchain specifically for the purpose of creating and preserving trust. And so I think that's really important to be able to do. Bridges for sending messages are very good. Bridges for sending assets, I'd say, are okay right now. I don't think they're great. I think that the UX is quite slow and sloppy. It's always improving, but I think there's a lot of work to be done. So that's generally how I think about it.
Yeah, you mentioned I guess we'll call it cross-chain messaging. I think you mentioned Wormhole earlier. Talk to us a little bit about how you guys, kind of evaluated the options there. I've seen some people talk about like, hey, we're going to expand IBC from Cosmos into Ethereum into Solana. Other people being like, hey, there's Layer 0 and Wormhole. Talk to us a little bit about like cross-chain interoperability and how you guys kind of made the decisions there.
Yeah, this also is very similar to why do we build on Solana. So the intention for Pyth data is to be the fastest in the world that has trust, and there was only one fastest blockchain, and that was Solana. And so almost by default you have to go there. And so if there was a version of Solana that was faster, we would probably have to move there. And in fact, that's why we're looking at doing modifications to PythNet so that we can continue to bring the block times down, because there are layer 2s. For instance, the Unichain, I mean, they're at 250 milliseconds. Solana's at 400. So we actually do need to bring those times down. But when we first connected, Wormhole was really the only bridge that actually met our needs. It was connected to Solana. It allowed for messaging. And so a lot of it had to do with what was available at the time. And then we've really grown with Wormhole, and it's met our needs. In fact, we've actually connected Pyth to more chains than Wormhole is currently on, because when a Wormhole deployment is done, it does both a messaging as well as as an asset bridge. And for Pyth, we really just need one-way messaging. It's just broadcast, because the downstream applications are going to rely on their state, but they've already brought it in via the broadcast state, and so the signed messages are there. So it's actually one of the lightest requirements for needing a bridge.
Very interesting. And then talk to us a little bit about, because people obviously are familiar with other Oracle solutions like a Chainlink. Talk to us how you kind of differentiate yourself from other data providers.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the core thesis was, how do you do this really fast? Chainlink was the leading innovator in oracles and created trust. I think as kind of the OG. And they helped herald in DeFi 1.0. Their architecture is very different. So they have a very vast set of nodes, but those nodes generally are generalists that read from various places, usually open public APIs. So it's like the internet. And so a lot of their data gets kind of scraped or grabbed from the internet by the nodes, and then they establish trust by having various levels of redundancy. So it could be the case where you have a single data source, but you have 10 nodes who are reporting on it. It makes makes weeding out a bad actor very easy to do. In fact, this is actually kind of how Wormhole works. They've got 19 guardians, and they sort of attest to the same message. They say, it's blue over here, it's blue over there, and therefore, if somebody says that it's green, they've been weeded out. It's actually quite simple to do. The problem with that is and the other element of it is they push these these updates on chain. And so basically, you have no idea what's happening until it's been pushed on chain, and each deployment ends up having this kind of expensive gas requirement because these updates being pushed on chain require all this gas. And so there would be this very differentiated offering from chain to chain. So I think these were some of the biggest problems. And as a user, basically, if you're on Optimism, what it would look like is, maybe you're getting updates for 10 symbols every 20 seconds. If you're on Ethereum, maybe you're getting 100 symbols, but they're only once a day. And if you're on Solana, maybe you're getting, 30 symbols and they're happening every 10 seconds. That's not great. Because what you really want is you want the finest resolution possible, and you want even distribution across all chains. So we were focused on cutting out both end-to-end latency as well as creating the faster availability. So getting rid of the reporters was, the first thing that kind of went. So when you start kicking things out, you're like, how do I save on costs and latency? And that's probably more work than you would imagine. Because generally the world of financial market data, specifically in like the traditional markets, is highly monopolized by a few small exchanges. And so there's about 5 US exchanges that make around $7 billion selling market data.
And let's talk a little bit about some of the partnerships and collaborations. You guys mentioned you're on over 70 plus chains. Talk to us a little bit about like that experience and like any kind of like notable partnerships you guys have.
Yeah. So the way that we thought about kind of going to market was, rather than try and be the largest oracle to the largest number of people in general, we wanted to make sure that we were able to capture huge market shares on the chains where we're available. So within 7 months, I think we had over 90% of the market share on Solana, and that's really never changed. And then we started deploying on other chains where speed was important. So today we're on, as I mentioned, I think 78, but Sui Optos, so the Move chains, Pyth has got over 90%, actually about almost 100% market share. On most of the Cosmos chains, it's like that. And then on like the layer twos, it's for the most part on the fast ones where there's kind of a high trading applications, Pyth has huge market share there. And the reason why we wanted to do it this way is, we thought a little bit about like kind of the Facebook go to market, right? So prior to Facebook, there was MySpace, and MySpace was like the place where anyone who was on the internet that wanted a social network would go. But Facebook was like just for people in Harvard, and then just for people in Harvard and Yale and the Ivies, and then other universities. And I think it makes a lot of sense if you can kind of tap into these markets and become the marquee partner for all these things. Then there's tremendous sticking power around it. And so that's been the case. I think that the strategy of making sure that Pyth is kind of the primary oracle for a category of apps that require high throughput data is really been the thing that resonates the most with people. And so when you think about how you would value an oracle, there's kind of two types of users. There's lending protocols, and then there's like perps. And lending protocols generally have huge total value locked. Obviously, Aave and Compound are the two largest. So Chainlink actually is the largest oracle by total value secured because they're the oracle for those two. But when you get to the total volume, like the total transaction volume that's enabled by an oracle, Pyth is by far the largest. And this is because of applications like Synth Futures and Synthetics. All these perps equate to almost $1 trillion worth of volume that's been enabled by the network. And so, that's where we think about our core strength and like really our core area for kind of partnerships.
And then talk to us a little bit about like some of the challenges you guys specifically faced and how you overcame them. It seems like from the outside looking in, it seems like mostly like speed issues, like being like, oh, hey, we almost just completely maxed out Solana's block space, or like, oh, hey, we need to like do all of this cross-chain compatibility. So talk to us a little bit about some of the challenges and then what you guys did to overcome them.
Yeah, I think those are certainly some of the biggest ones. Maintaining our edge with regards to the number of symbols that are offered while maintaining that high trust has been one. and then introducing products where it's appropriate to try and allow for applications to just be better. So one way to think about Pyth is, as kind of an oracle. Another way to think about it is this giant network of big trading firms who are willing and able to do stuff on a blockchain. And so earlier this year, Pyth launched the Express Relay. And so Express Relay is really a way for applications to tap into this network of trading firms that are daily active participants within the network to be able to perform functions. And they can wrap any function in an auction and then have it be bid out to this network of traders. So the first integrations were really like lending protocols looking to bid out their liquidations. And most people are aware that liquidations offer this 20% premium to liquidators. But generally, it gets fully extracted by searchers or validators. And Flashbots kind of put it together an auction in order to bring some order to the market as opposed to having it go through kind of like bribes. But the problem there is that the protocol itself that enabled that opportunity, so like the lending protocol, they get completely left out of this. And so the mechanics of it are actually quite bad. Because an Oracle price is so foundational to whether or not a liquidation event has occurred, it was a natural fit for the network to be able to kind of offer this. And so earlier this year, Pyth launched Express Relay. Was first on a couple of layer twos with Ionic being the first lending protocol to do so. And what they get is they get a network of searchers who probably wouldn't have thought about Ionic as a place that they would integrate. And likewise for these trading firms, they get more opportunities because it's been netted together. And so thinking about ways to kind of strip out as much of the cost and the speed from Oracle, from the blockchain networks has really been our critical focus. We launched recently Pyth Prices V3. So V1 was Solana, V2 was on PythNet, and V3 offered security based on staking. So now the publishers are able to stake to the quality of their prices. Delegators can also do that. And what this does is add for the first time a whole set of staking mechanisms to ensure the trust and quality of not just one or two, but 100% of the symbols that are on the network. This is something that we're very proud of because it's been hypothesized and kind of theorized in the market for a really long time. In fact, that was one of the things that people were most excited about with EigenLayer, is like they can finally offer some staking that really works for Oracle prices. But the problem with like the Eigen solution is it's generalized, and restaking doesn't necessarily know that you're backing up the value of an Oracle. But when you have like the publishers who are in the network who are betting on themselves, it makes a whole lot more sense. And so if there's a mispricing, now that stake is available to be slashed, and so you've got this economic incentive for people to kind of provide the best possible data.
Yeah, it seemed like some exciting milestone. Now, is there any projection on when those will be released, or are those already all released?
Those are all released. So the Express Relay went live earlier this year, I think in June. And then at Solana Breakpoint, we announced Oracle Integrity Staking, and it was live that day. Today, we've crossed 150 million Pyth tokens staked in the protocol. And so that's within the first 2 weeks of being live. So we're pretty excited about that. Hopefully that number continues to grow. There are incentives obviously in place if you do stake for this. And so you can earn up to 10% rewards as a publisher or 8% as a delegator.
Very exciting. And then a few questions we love to ask just because we want to get more builders in this space. If you weren't working on Pyth, or maybe there's just a problem out there in the Web3 community, what do you think is a big problem that you feel like is under-addressed in crypto that like builders could jump on?
Yeah, I think that like DeFi is to me the killer app for blockchains. And DeFi is, or finance, I tend to like overgeneralize as being kind of trading and asset management. You could also analogize it being gambling and fit into those two categories, but but trading and asset management cover it. I think that trading is probably the most developed, and while it will continue to evolve when we've got the barriers, or like the border barriers and things like that, switching costs are all sort of removed. I think it's on its like the right trajectory to do so. And I think that like we saw with communications going onto the internet, I think we're going to start to see like real feature parity. So, your equivalent of a Snapchat for trading and stuff like that. I think that'll all happen, but we're on a good trajectory. What I think we're not necessarily yet on a good trajectory is asset management. So if you were like ask an average person, how would you invest in a hedge fund? They're just going to like give you a blank stare. It would be like, well, first you need to have a private bank with JP Morgan. Well, how do you do that? Well, you need $10 million in assets. And like if you wanted to become Sequoia, you probably need $100 million to be an LP in Sequoia. So like when you look at it, you're like, oh yeah, that feels the most broken, right? And it also feels broken on the other end of the spectrum when you've got someone like Roaring Kitty who is effectively able to control tremendous amounts of money, but he does it in this dodgy way where it's on a Reddit chat, and he sort of gets his position in, and then similar to the way that people like do big short selling, like releases a thesis and then kind of gets himself out of it. It would make a whole lot more sense if there was some more rigor around that, and you just were able to democratize like the business of asset management. Of course, a lot of this stuff is held back by regulations, and so unless regulations are open to experimenting or sandboxing the way that we had in the internet, where like Uber was allowed to bypass being a taxi company by being a technology company. I think that's going to be one of those things that's holding it back. But this does feel like the one that's gotten the least level of innovation. And it also is the one where it most closely analogizes what we saw as big breakthroughs that had been tested before. So like years ago, eToro had this trade mirror program, and like our copy trade program. It was like the thing that they always talked about as being like their most successful product, but it never actually was all that successful. They were just mostly like a high leverage FX broker. And I say this working from like a investment banking FX desk because we looked through the actual revenues of it. But it was a good hook, right? And it was a good narrative, and it's the reason why people would kind of come over there. But we've seen it before. We know people want to do this, but there's just still too much friction around, or not enough transparency or accountability. So that feels like those old tablets, like that predated the iPad, where it's like, yeah, we kind of have tablets, but they're all kind of clunky. They don't really work well. So I actually think that there's going to be the most innovation here.
All right, so some exciting spots to develop, and talk to us a little bit if you have some upcoming milestones or developments people can kind of look forward to from you guys.
Yeah, so we're constantly looking to make things better, and the reason for that is our kind of greatest competitor or enemy is TradFi. Not that we think that TradFi is all wrong, but we think that there are so many things that there are those moments where, like every at least year or 3 years, every person who's got some kind of a traditional finance partnership or like account goes, man, this really sucks. But it doesn't happen all the time, and so they're kind of like stuck in. For me, it was when I moved from London to Portugal, trying to move my bank accounts, and you had to go into like a branch office. So, and like the sad reality of new technologies is that people don't move over because of the feature. For the most part, that is the core feature of it. Like people didn't move over to online shopping when it was just like you can connect to the inventory and things like that. They moved over when everything was better than the predecessor. And I think that people will only move over to DeFi when everything is better than the predecessor. So like the throughput and the fees and the latencies all really need to be at those same levels. So we think we're pretty close. For some of the stuff, like gas cost is still a little bit too expensive. Round trip times are a little bit too high. Like 400 milliseconds is especially when you consider that like sometimes they'll have 2 transactions for something to trade, is a little bit too slow relative to like Schwab. Your fastest round trip time is going to be like 300 milliseconds. And also you're usually not paying for stuff on TradFi in commission, like upfront. Like there's always this thing in the background called payment for order flow, where it's like $0 commissions and you actually get a better deal. That stuff really hasn't been kind of innovated. And these are the problems that we want to solve, and we want to solve them for all applications. And so we think that like the next version, like Price Feeds V4, should kick the shit out of like Price Feeds V3, which we think is like by far the state of the art for all of blockchains. And so I think that like, that's what we're really focused on. We're kind of infrastructure nerds that really want to make sure everything is as fast as possible. Just the way that NVIDIA is constantly trying to push Moore's law, we're constantly trying to push the boundaries of what applications are possible, what type of applications are possibly built.
Yeah, it's definitely an exciting future. I'm consulting with for a few projects that do like, I'll call it like omni-chain, we'll call it like intense, like gas abstraction, all these kinds of abstractions. I'm like, okay, it's getting easier on the users. The tech is getting better. You know, I think our day is soon, maybe in like 2-3 years, where my mom might be using some kind of DeFi, even if she doesn't know it's actually DeFi under the hood. But where do you guys envision kind of Pyth Network being in the next few years? And then finally, like, where can people find you online?
Yeah, I mean, the network has grown so incredible in the last few years. So 2 banks have already joined this year. We've pretty much got every trading firm on, all the exchanges. So it's not difficult to imagine a scenario where you've got all the financial institutions which have connected through the network. And this is where possibilities around porting not just the crypto markets, but things that people refer to as real world assets, but it's just traditional markets. When there's an explosion of that. And I don't think it's going to be just like a matter of a couple extra million users. I think this is when things can get transformationally bigger. And I feel very confident that we're heading in that direction, even though it feels a little bit slow when you're like in the weeds. Year over year, on-chain derivatives volumes did almost tenfold. And about a year ago, it was 1% of Binance. Now we're around 8% of Binance for all on-chain volumes. It's one of those things that, because it's moving so slow, you don't really notice it. But when you zoom out, you actually realize it's a huge thing. That's the thing that I'm kind of most excited about, and where I think we're going to grow. Like we're largely the dominant oracle for high-speed applications, and we intend to stay that way. And then finally, where you can find us is on all the socials. Pyth Network is our website. M. Cahill on X as well.
Awesome. And I'll put all the links in the description. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and let's continue building the future of Web3.